Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Saturday podcast. I'm Samson Folk. Of course, this one not live. Uh I'm signed up to take care of Trevon on his 30th birthday party, so I'm not able to go live. And so we're getting this, which is a Raptors rookie report. And the Raptors are in a very unique position with their rookies, and it makes sense to me to describe it as unique because Jacoby Walter, Jonathan Mogbo, these are two players who Jacoby more than Jonathan, the fan base is really excited about, but there aren't numbers that pop. And Jamal Shead, then you go look at him, and he's a guy who the fan base is excited about, and his numbers, they don't necessarily pop either, but for the 45th overall pick, he's putting up quite large numbers. Jacoby is operating, he's winning a lot of the in-between battles. Jonathan Mogbo as well. We're seeing guys who are being put in more difficult positions, different positions than they were in college, and watching them try to get accustomed to doing it at the NBA level. It's been very interesting. I will say when it comes to Ulrich, I won't really be talking about him in depth because Coty Wiles did such a fantastic video essay on Ulrich, and you can find that on the Raptors Republic YouTube channel. And he goes deeper there than I ever possibly could on this podcast. And it's supplemented by video and all that kind of stuff. And Ulrich got injured, like he tore his MCL shortly after that. So that is the best prepackaged analysis of Ulrich as far as I'm concerned. And we didn't really see a lot of him at the NBA level. More than anything, though, I want to start off with Jacoby Walter. Jacoby has been an extremely interesting prospect because he came out of Baylor being a guy who was creating a lot of shots off the bounce and a guy who took a lot of drives and was trying to create as much as possible. And Baylor put him in those positions repeatedly. But the thing is, once he came to the Raptors, he wasn't allowed to try that role initially. That wasn't the expectation. And even though there's a bunch of different players have a bunch of, let's say, latent abilities or potential, Jacoby just stepped into the NBA game as a guy who grabbed a few more rebounds than you might have expected and cut and also was stickier and had a little bit more force at the point of attack defensively than anybody might have expected from him. And that stuck out to everybody. He's averaging 7.8 points per game, 2.9 rebounds, 1.3 assists. Digging into any of that, we'll get into a lot of the shooting, obviously. The rebounding three isn't a bunch. However, in the short amount of time that he is playing, I'm a fan of it. His true shooting percentage is 51%. As far as if you're looking for the splits, we're looking at 40% from the field, 31% from three, which has been ticking up. It was pretty gnarly earlier on in the season, and almost 75% from downtown or from the free throw line. Sorry. It's watching him on offense cut, fill, rebound, offensive rebounding too, has been fun. And it is on a Raptors team that I think will deem it very important for him to continue to walk out this role. A guy like Grady Dick, who has a more expansive offensive role, and if things break right, it's easy to see how he gets to like 20 points per game or something like that if the shots are there. He has to have a larger chunk of the offense to some degree. But Jacoby is a guy who, yeah, it's been a little disheartening that his scoring didn't translate immediately, but he's been able to do so many other things. He's been able to, take that peeled back version of his offensive game and make it work around other players. His catch and shoot 3-point shooting definitely started off in a really bad place this season, but has slowly been ticking upwards and getting better. The cutting is good because he finishes well off of cuts, but as far as like the finishing on his own, it's been trouble. There's absolutely no substitute for shot making, but this Raptors team heading into next season when they want to be good. Now, the end of this season, obviously you can bandy about and go back and forth on like, do the Raptors want to win games? What does that look like? But next year, objectively, given who's on the roster, what trade they made, and you just look at the team, they want to start winning next year. They want to make a playoff run. And how they've structured the roster, it's very friendly to a low usage shooting guard who can defend. And the Raptors, one of the number one archetypes that they're missing on this team currently is a low usage shooting guard who actually provides a decent amount of defensive pop. Now, some people obviously could bring up Ochai Agbaji, who has done a fantastic job of making his offensive game very efficient. He's north of 60% true shooting. He's hit catch and shoot looks like really well. He's finished in transition. He cuts as well. However, Ochai is a guy who I think his defense it's maybe a little bit overrated, and definitely from where I'm standing, it looks that way. I think Jacoby has far more upside as a defensive prospect, and Jacoby has done a fantastic job of sticking in front of players at the NBA level. It shouldn't be a surprise that Jacoby is in the 95th percentile in points per possession allowed in isolation defensively per synergy. He's been able to slide with guys. He's been able to hold his ground better, and he can bother the dribble at some point. So not just a guy who's playing contained defense, but there's a bit of danger for defensive playmaking coming from him as well. He's been good chasing guys off of screens. He's been good in spot-up situations where he has to close out, control closeouts, and keep the offensive player in front of him. Also be able to put up a contest. Like, these are massive facets of what shooting guards have to do. And his pick and roll defense definitely it's struggled because he doesn't have a super hyper awareness of, let's say, where the screener is. And because he gives guys a little bit more of a buffer when he's playing on point or on ball defense, he can be manipulated into screen a little bit, like a little bit easier, and he can get pushed and screened out of the way, out of the play. And that's a part of things, but also he's just been very impressive in rotation. Of course, he makes mistakes. He's a rookie, but as far as being able to help the Raptors hold their defense accountable, as far as having a guy who can step out on guys, bother their dribble, hang with them, and not forfeit a step into the paint, he's been very, very important in that regard. And while his efficiency, especially for the types of shots he takes, is really low right now, like 51% true shooting, being a guy who can step onto the defensive end, be a game changer, that will allow him on a team that wants to win next season, that will allow him room to become a guy who gets minutes, who gets into the rotation. Even if he's struggling with his shot, sometimes that defense is going to be much more important than the offense. Why? Because as far as the roster is constructed currently, we're looking at a team that is going to have a lot of mouths to feed. And Jacoby being a guy who's like, I'll just give you hell on defense, and I'll take some open threes, I'll cut, I'll fill, I'll do all this kind of stuff, and he can continue the play after the catch a little bit. That bodes really well for potentially what this Raptors team will ask of him. I think he has, more than anything, impressed as a defender. And that isn't what people expected coming out of the draft. It isn't what I expect. Well, maybe some people did. Who knows? But it isn't what I expected. And then speaking to the offensive upside, not just like how he fits into a role immediately, I think that the manipulation with the dribble it's not very strong at all. However, he is comfortable getting into movement jumpers. He's comfortable taking a wide array of shots. That comfortability in the middle of the floor, I think, is really important. He attacks closeouts, keeps control with the ball, gets to his spot, little fader, push shot, whatever it might be. He's a guy who, out of the pick and roll, is not that bad, actually using his handle to move a guy into a screen and create space, drive downhill. Not usually super deep. That's not something he's had a lot of success with, but getting to maybe a mid-range jumper, that's been successful for him. And also, there's a couple pull-up jumpers out of the pick and roll that I think could let you believe on something happening in the future. Whether it's, I mean, who's to say high volume? I wouldn't expect it. But for a guy who projects, at least at this point, to maybe be a strong defender and a strong guard defender, which is really important in this NBA. Well, in what NBA was it not important? Which is really important. I just think anything you get offensively, if he manages to cut, if he manages to hit his open threes, it creates a floor, it creates a baseline for him to create impact. It allows him to do something and always be valuable when he's out there. Now, there are guys, we see them all the time, who they're limited offensively and they're really fun during the regular season and they play hellacious defense and they make things move on that end, and they're not able to continue developing into efficient enough shot makers. Jacoby's going to have to prove it. It's his second year, though. He doesn't have to prove it next season. It's not up to him to prove it this season. We're just looking for, the seeds of that growth. We're just looking for Do you think this is a possibility? And he has planted those. Whether it grows into a shrub or a tree of creation, whatever it ends up being, at the very least, it's something you can believe in, and he'll get a chance to work at it year over year and try and make that happen. And he's done that because he provides a defensive floor. Jacoby has not popped off in the way that many people thought he would. And honestly, like, his injury is really disappointing towards the end of the season because he is a guy who, like, Norman Powell had when he was young and just joined the Raptors, DeLon Wright when he was young and just on the Raptors, like Fred, all these guys had big games towards the end of the year, like that March, April basketball where they get more of the ball and they get to try stuff out. It's disheartening that Jacoby isn't out there to try stuff. And maybe he will be for the end of the season. I suspect he will be the last couple games at least, but we're really missing out on something. I think that he would have been one of the more fun players to watch, and especially like his attempts at creation. Who's to say how it would go? Maybe we'll get to see, but I'm waiting with bated breath to watch that Jacoby Walter film because that was one of the things that was really fun about Grady towards the end of last season. And Jacoby, in my mind, has had a better rookie season than Grady did. I still am higher on Grady overall, but if Grady's defense doesn't come along, there's no reason why Jacoby shouldn't be able to usurp Grady as like the de facto best shooting guard, combo guard prospect on the roster. And I really like Grady, but Jacoby's defense has really impressed me. And I believe in the offense coming around. So that's where we're sitting on Jacoby Walter. I don't really see the big creation stuff going forward, but I hope I'm wrong about that. I do see him being a good catch and shoot shooter. I do see him being a good guard defender, maybe even elite someday, right? And I do see him as a guy who he gets in the muck. He plays in the in-between. He dives on balls. He gets after it on the glass. He helps out. He's been really fun. Jacoby Walter, the check-in on him as a rookie is a good one. 19th pick, very fun rookie season. All right. Jonathan Mogbo, people. More than Jamal has, more than Jacoby has. Jonathan has been elite at one thing. That's switch defense. Mobo's ability to step out on guys, he wasn't asked to do it so often at San Francisco, and the fact that he was able to immediately start doing it, and it's, Jordan Poole is like a rite of passage for guys to step out on and hang in on, and not like it, because sometimes you can limit Jordan Poole to a jump shot because he wants to take that jump shot, but Mo was done it against a wide array of stars early on in the season. It it obviously the big one was Anthony Edwards, and it was like play after play. We realized later on that, of course, Anthony Edwards was a little bit more focused on this season being an unbelievable pull-up threat, so it was maybe a little bit easier to goad him into those jumpers. However, when he was shooting them on Jonathan Mogbo, they were clanking or they were catching air, and that's it. That is what, more than anything, Mogbo has been able to bring to the NBA is elite switch defense, really strong isolation defense. That's a great thing. Now, Trey and I have talked about in the past why there's a limit to this because Mogbo is usually switching from a strong front court position, right? And he's switching off of a front court player. And Mogbo has played small ball five, but even as a four, when he switches out and he's going on a guard because he can do it, that's impressive. But it means that a big is now on a guard, and the Raptors have a really hard time closing out those defensive possessions without Mogbo hanging out by the glass. And he played a bunch of games without Jakob Poeltl, so this manifested in the Raptors just when Mogbo's on the floor, they can't rebound by the stats anyway. It's something that I think will get better going forward, and especially when we consider the Raptors' view of Jonathan Mogbo. And Jonathan is maybe the biggest swing here in terms of expectation versus what might be the outcome, because the Raptors looking at him from jump and saying, he was 23 almost near the start of the season. Shortly into the season he turns into a 23-year-old. That's different than Jacoby, who's much younger. Jamal is also older. Ulrich is really young, almost born in 2006, just at the very end, the tail end of 2005. Daggum. But anyway, to this point, Mogbo was drafted as a center out of San Francisco, where he was an analytics darling because he dunked everything and he was so efficient and he could disrupt so much stuff. Now, the Raptors draft him and say, we're going to have you be a wing. And he's listed as a power forward in most places, and he did play as a power forward a lot this year. But I do think their vision is, of course, in a pinch, he can run delay action. He can run a lot of their pistol sets. It's going to be something that the Raptors have him do, especially because they have so many wings on offense. They're going to look for the smallest of the bigs or the biggest of the wings to be the guy who acts as like a facsimile of the big in their offense, where they use post hubs and work through, those touches at the elbow or, almost above the break. That kind of stuff matters. That Mogbo has those skills already, but they said they want a wing, and it's very clear why they want a wing. Because Mogbo, if he's not playing a front court position on defense, could develop into a truly talented wing defender. You see things in how he defends, how he's able to move his feet, stay with people. It could be he could be one of the stronger wing defenders in the NBA. However, there's a lot of guys over the history of the NBA. It's similar to what we talked about with Jacoby Walter. There's a lot of strong defenders who are incredible defenders who just can't keep themselves on the floor because of their offense. Mogbo, even though I really like Jonathan Mogbo, he is at risk of this. Them's the breaks. Jonathan Mogbo is at risk of not being able to capitalize on his defensive potential because he doesn't have high enough outcomes offensively, and teams play off of him, and it mucks up the offense. And the only way you can have him out there and have it be effective is if he's like pitching the ball, setting screens, catching, handoff, all that kind of stuff where you use him as a big. But the problem with that is that he has not been able to finish like a big. The finishing prowess that he brought out of college, where he dunked everything, where he was more athletic than, it wasn't the best conference in the NCAA. He was a very like an athletic specimen in that conference for sure. A lot of guys couldn't meet him at the rim. That has not been something we've seen at the NBA level. And it's something I wonder if it comes around, because there are guys like Montrezl Harrell, there are guys like Kenneth Faried, there are guys like, you think about going back, guys who are like that 6'8", who did find a way to like play above the rim, catch, pound dribble, dunk more often. And then as their athleticism faded a little bit, they kind of figured out like flip shots, touch shots. Mogbo doesn't have the flip shots, doesn't have the touch shots, and has not had guys creating these super easy dunks for him and these super easy looks. A lot of times when he's trying to go up at the rim, he's seeing a decent amount of defensive attention, and he's not been able to score over top of it. Like his stats, of course, I should have said it at the top, but he's averaging on the season 5.3 points per game, 4.1 rebounds, 1.6 assists. The assists, you can read into that if you want, but I think like we see Colin Castleton had 6 assists the other day. Orlando Robinson had 6 assists the other day. Like if you're a big man in the Raptors offense, you run enough actions, you're going to make high-low reads. You're going to hand off for assists and stuff like that. I don't think Mogbo's passing has been super impressive. He's got almost a steal per game, and he's doing this in like 18 minutes. 45% from the field. 30% from three, which is better. The catch and shoot shot has come along a little bit quicker, and 70% from the free throw line. His shooting touch is something that he has worked on. It's something that he has improved. I'm hoping to see it get better going into next year as well. But it is something that objectively sits at a much better rate than it did in college. That's a good marker. That's healthy. That's what we want to see. However, the finishing, he doesn't have the floater to counter it. He doesn't have the pump and the footwork and ability to maneuver these situations. He just is not being given the ball with a lane to go up and challenge guys and dunk on them. He's being given the ball in like the dunker spot or maybe 9 feet away and just has to go up against a rotating big. It's not gone well. He has to figure out something that makes him valuable on offense. And it seems to me that the Raptors are not going to ask him to do that in the big man sort of way, but they're going to ask him to do it in the wing sort of way, which means obviously Mogbo in the future could be a guy who's like catching in, the dunker spot, and just depending on how the Raptors are kind of orienting their offense, that could be there. There's potential for that kind of stuff. However, and this is a big thing, he can only move into those roles once he's established that he can shoot and that teams will respect that. Like a guy like Drew Holiday can play in the dunker spot and guards can play in the dunker spot. Nembhard and Holiday both did it. If you watch the Eastern Conference Finals last year, it was happening a lot. And this is cutting edge offense. And while Mogbo isn't, you know, he isn't a guard putting people in the dunker spot as much as people want 5-out offense, the dunker spot is still a valuable like release valve for drives. It's still a valuable place to work from as a passer and as a finisher. And Mogbo can operate in that place after a corner crush or corner crash, after a cut, after something like that. But he has to be able to hit threes. He has to take more than 1 3 a game, and it has to be passable. And I mean, it's tough to see it all come together for him as a wing because he does have that nice like left to right cross. It's a skinny little cross. It's not super wide, but he beats bigs with it. But bigs just play off of him. He isn't able to worry people. He isn't able to scare them. And the absence of finesse in his offensive game, it's really present. You can see it on the floor. He needs offensively to have a point of strength to work off from and develop from. Now, at 23 and almost a half, these types of things, the clock is ticking maybe a little bit faster, but he's doing things defensively that will help. And I wonder on what will be a funky team next year. And like he's a second round pick, he's not a first round pick, but he's the first pick of the second round. Like the Raptors like him. The Raptors believe in him. They saw things they like. They see things they like. He's going to get a chance to work on this stuff. It just might be ugly. And all this to say, the offense has been really ugly this year. He has been, it's a tale of two sides of the floor for Jonathan Mogbo because it's so easy to see why it works on defense. And especially if he plays alongside another big. He might be that guy. Like, how in the playoffs you see Draymond Green will just like push guys out of the way and whoever's screening, like he'll go get him. And then teams have to play the cat and mouse game of like choosing the screeners, doing all that kind of stuff. But if Mogbo and Pirtle, there's just a lot of clunkiness offensively, but defensively, they would make so much sense together because Mogbo could be a guy who plays low, who disrupts passing lanes, who's that secondary rim force if Pirtle is playing like in drop defense and that's working. But if Pirtle is getting cooked in pick and roll, you just start sending Mogbo up and you keep Pirtle around the rim. Like it's just things could work there. It's just Mogbo needs that point of strength on offense. That's what we're waiting for Jonathan Mogbo. So I think a very middle of the road rookie season, not as much health as he probably would have liked, but them's the breaks. And he kind of got like the Raptors just weren't playing him because they needed to showcase their trade deadline guys. So Mogbo was left out of the rotation for quite some time because they wanted to trade Bruce Brown. They wanted teams to ask about Chris Boucher. They wanted to trade Kelly Olynyk. So he fell to the wayside a little bit, and he's dealing with God. He got his face smashed, dude. Oh my days, did he have his face smashed? Hope he's better soon. But a very middle of the road rookie season. There's not super high expectations for second round picks, but he was the first one made, and the Raptors like him a lot. And middle of the road, tale of two sides of the floor. I hope next year is a big one for him. I hope he comes back with something that we haven't seen this season. That would be very exciting. And if he can keep himself on the floor offensively, you get to start being pretty weird about defensive lineups, and you could probably win a lot of possessions on defense if you're using him as kind of like a Swiss Army knife or something like that. Jonathan Mogbo. Now, another tale of two sides a little bit guy, Jamal Shead. Let's do the stat line first. 6.2 points, 1.3 rebounds, 3.7 assists, 60 games played. He's been playing almost every game, right? 18 minutes per game, 42% from the floor, 32, nearly 33% from three, 75% from the free throw line, half a steal a game. Jamal Shead. He was discussed as like a prodigious defender coming out of the draft. And you understand why, because you watch that Houston tape and he goes crazy there. However, something that is much different at the NBA level is that teams aren't playing the line of scrimmage, Kelvin Sampson style of defense. and the floor is bigger. And that's partially why teams don't try and overwhelm with the line of scrimmage. And that means that Jamal Shead, his aggressiveness, and Jamal Shead very clearly had a bit of carte blanche. Like looking back, watching that Houston tape and seeing how he got to overwhelm guys physically, he had his reputation as an elite defender at the college level. And he played a lot of college. Refs knew, other teams knew. He comes in the NBA and he brings that same level of aggression without, the players are bigger, the talent is better, and he fouls a lot. And yes, he can get an on-ball steal every once in a while, but for the most part, Jamal is a guy who, in my mind, when I watch, of the three, like Shamshe exists in his own thing, obviously, because he was almost like a pre-draft selection. The Raptors just drafted him and were like, there's so much to work on. Go to the 905. But Shed, Mogbo, and Walter all playing like a lot of NBA minutes. Shed has been the worst defender of the three. That, if you had told somebody that prior to the season, it probably would have been very surprising. The defense is, he's not as sharp working around screens. I know he can force a moving screen every once in a while, but he's not as sharp working around screens as one might like. He's not been as strong in isolation defense either. And he just hasn't been super effective as a guard defender. I know there's a lot of aesthetic stuff. And honestly, if anyone disagrees, like that's also cool. We're all allowed to disagree. But there's some aesthetic stuff, like some aggression, I'm really into it, that kind of stuff that really, like the Pat Bev of it all. Of course, Jamal Shead is not Pat Bev. I don't like Pat Bev at all for many reasons, but there is that ethic that Pat Bev has where it's like, I'm doing a lot. It looks like I'm doing a lot so that a passive watcher will be like, that guy is a dog on defense. And Jamal Shead perhaps could be a dog someday on defense, and he definitely was in college, but the defense has really disappointed me this season. Now, the offense is where I think he has impressed because the expectations were not very high. And keep in mind, this is a guy who was drafted 45th overall. 45th picks, the careers are not usually long and expansive. And he has done a couple things that make me believe a lot more in the possibility of there being a career here. Because Jacoby, I think there's a career there, really. Mogbo has to prove some things for there to be a career. Certainly, he has to navigate offensive stuff. Jamal, as a small guard, you have to prove a lot. It's very hard to be a small guard in the NBA, and you need to do some things extremely well. He's proven two things in my mind. He has proven that he can shoot more threes, that he can try and work up movement threes, that he can try and put himself in stronger positions as a shooter, and that he will work on it. He's had a really tough stretch lately. In my mind, it's because he's been taking more movement threes and he's been taking tougher shots. As a strictly easy catch and shoot guy, I think he got better from Houston to the NBA, even with the line getting farther away. I think that's a real thing. That means something when guys improve. Like, of course it does. What is his number one NBA skill, though? Is his quickness with the ball. Teams overplay him all the time, not expecting him to be able to turn the corner or shoot the gap. And he really has been able to do that at the NBA level. And it's impressed me a bunch because he gets, and also his finishing at the rim is not impressive because he's a small guard, so he doesn't get easy looks. But relative to the difficult shots he gets, the bank shot in particular, I know he was just a fraction of a second, what was like 1/10 of a second late on hitting that game winner, but that is emblematic of a shot that he's been able to get to. And I have on the podcast been like, I've lamented his shot diet and said, like, you can't just live on short mid range push shots and stuff like that. And you can't. Like Jamal he has to develop more pace, more like he has to change speeds more often. He has to have more guile in the middle as a playmaker to open up the ability to get deeper as a scorer. Like there's a million things you have to develop as a small guard in the NBA. But what he does do is he does get to spots and he does get to that spot for the short mid range. And his touch seems to be pretty good. Those two things, that he is faster than people expected, that he's able to get to more dangerous spots on the court, maybe than, teams expect when they're going out to play him. And the fact that you can believe in the jumper a little bit, all that stuff, those are really good markers. It's almost never, it's so like Fred VanVleet was such a hard guy to make sense of coming out of the draft, right? Like he's just small guard. You need the shooting to pop the hell off, and he doesn't shoot it well his first year. It's not super high volume, but he just doesn't have it go down. And then he develops into this like incredible defensive guard who's doing a lot of work as a chaser and doing a lot of work as the guy at the nail. Those, as Lou Satzman always refers to him, those big meaty hooks that he's able to dig into guys' drives. That stuff is also important. And Jamal Shead doesn't have either of those things yet. And Jamal Shead needs something to swing him. Because he is, like, the Raptors sat him for a reason the other night. He was plus 17 in 12 minutes because he did a decent job of heralding the offense, or commandeering the offense, and putting them in the right positions and putting the team in positions to win and kind of like moving in and out. It's important. He does have, after 4 years in college, a little bit of that like floor general thing going on. He just has to be more dangerous. And the defense, while I've been hard on it, on this podcast and throughout the year, you could see it becoming good. Because he has the mentality for it, he has the want, he has the will, he will get the know-how from many people around the league. He's well liked. He talks to a lot of players. He will get that advice. He will get those film rooms, and he has the quickness. And he's small, but he's sturdy. He's not like Fred VanVleet. He's not like what's the term, ship brick house, like the Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet school of being a fire hydrant type of sturdy. But he's not slim. He is quick, and he really wants to be a strong defender. He's willing to put his whole life into it, and that could come around. What I'm not sure will come around is that manipulation to be able to get layups for himself and others more often. Is that like, it can't, as a small guard, it can't just be passable as a shooter. Like Jose Alvarado has been one of the most disruptive defensive guards in the NBA, right? And you look at, he had 29% his first year from three, 33% his second year, but 38% the next year on almost 4 attempts per game. He's almost 39% this year on over 5 attempts per game. Like, if that didn't creep up from 29-33, the Pelicans just might not really have any idea what they're going to do with that guy. And Jose, he's probably a little bit bigger. Like, I've spoken to both guys in person. I think Jose is probably a little bit bigger than Jamal, but it's just to that point, like, you really have to bring it as a small guard. And that's why, like, Jamal is well loved by the fan base and should be. And he brings it, dude. He's such a likable guy. But it's important to frame that he is up against it, that small guards really are up against it. And whether, you're a fan who wants to comp him to Kyle Lowry or comp him to Fred VanVleet, or whether you think that's all silly, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, he is up against it, and he needs to see significant progression as a manipulator to get himself to dangerous spots and to create easy looks for others. Otherwise, he's just not going to get the ball. And if you have a small guard out there, as much as he might be like really aggressive on defense, if that guy isn't providing heaps of offensive value to you, be it as a leader of the second unit or, mixing in with, let's say, these hybrid lineups with your starters, you're not going to want him out on the floor defensively. It's just rare. It's just rare that teams make that decision. It's more likely that like a Jacoby Walter would be selected for something like that, or Ochai if he's on the team, or whoever else, right? It's just most teams don't make that decision. Jamal, he's done enough to really get a good look next year. And he's been better than I think people expected, in a different way than people expected. And that is like relative to draft slot. I know I've been like, I don't know, maybe the critiques seem harder for myself on Shed than they do on Mogbo, but I think Mogbo, if I'm picking among the three, Mogbo's size is what gives him the best chance, or if I'm picking between Shead and Mogbo's size is what really gives him a chance to hang in and stick around the league. As much as he's been limited so far and just has so much trouble doing anything offensively, that size is going to help him stick. And Jamal, if he doesn't do these things, teams are going to look the other way very quickly, and that's just the nature of the league. But Jamal has been much better relative to his draft slot than I think Mogbo has been. And there are 14 teams between those guys. And the Raptors went 31 with John. They went 45 with Jamal. And Jamal has done, because he was always going to be up against it, always as a small guard. But Jamal, I think, has done a really strong job. Whether he is able to carve out like a real foothold in the league going forward, and I hope he does, whether or not that happens, I think he's done a really strong job this year doing things that are tough for him, and hopefully it provides the launch pad for things that have been escaping him, but hopefully will start being a little bit more impressive next year, like the defense. We'll wait and see, of course. A guy like Jamison Battle, he's one of the best. When he gets time, he's one of the more impressive catch and shoot 3-point shooters I've ever seen. It's just that dynamism, the percentages go way down when he's in movement, or when he has, when he doesn't get to set and get to his hitch exactly how he wants. Of course, he just had a really tough shooting game, 3 for 12. But before that, I mean, he's just unbelievable. He provides a little bit more rebounding pop than people would have expected. And he is big for a shooter, but he's very limited with his athleticism. I'm very interested to see what happens with him going forward. But again, another guy who he's done something, because he wasn't initially like penciled in for the two-way slot. He shot the hell out of the basketball. He was gritty as he could be defensively and on the glass, on both sides of the floor, that he was able to swipe one of those two ways, and he's trying to make his way in the league. I think that's been fun. Ulrich, watch the video essay by Coty Wiles. That's probably it, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I forgot to say like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Daggum. Myself and Trey will be back in a few days to talk about a bunch of prospects, who to look out for, who to watch out for in the NCAA tournament, March Madness. Should be super fun. With Mac and Curly coming on for that episode, I think, as well. So thank you to everybody for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you in a few days. All right. Later, Gator. Yeah. Yeah, whether you got into this in the morning or at night. Have a blessed day, and goodbye.